The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the cobblestones of Heritage Square still glistened under the amber streetlights. 23-year-old Maya Chen sat hunched over the weathered keys of her grandmother's upright piano, her fingers moving across the familiar melody that had become her nightly ritual. The old instrument had seen better days. Its mahogany finish was chipped and faded, several keys stuck when pressed too hard, and it required constant tuning that she couldn't afford. But it was hers, inherited from her grandmother, along with a mountain of medical debt that had consumed every penny of her savings over the past year. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The evening crowd was thin tonight. A few tourists snapped photos of the historic downtown district, while keeping their distance from the street performers scattered throughout the square. Maya had claimed this corner for the past 8 months, ever since she'd lost her job at the Music Conservatory and discovered that her master's degree in classical performance meant nothing when rent was due and creditors were calling. Her violin case lay open at her feet, containing the usual collection of coins and crumpled dollar bills that passers-by had tossed her way. On a good night, she might make $40. On nights like this, when the weather had driven most people indoors, she'd be lucky to cover bus fare home to her studio apartment across town. Maya's story wasn't supposed to unfold this way. 3 years ago, she had been the star pupil at Wellington Conservatory, praised by professors for her technical precision and emotional depth. She had dreams of performing with symphony orchestras, of seeing her name on concert hall programs, of making her late grandmother proud. But life had other plans. When her grandmother, Mei Lin, fell ill with cancer, Maya had moved back home to care for her. The treatments were expensive, and her grandmother's insurance covered only a fraction of the costs. Maya had taken out loans, sold her car, worked 3 part-time jobs while trying to finish her degree. For 2 years, she watched the woman who had raised her slowly fade away, all while trying to keep up with her studies and maintain some semblance of the musical career she'd worked so hard to build. The conservatory had been understanding at first, but missed classes and incomplete assignments eventually caught up with her. By the time her grandmother passed away last winter, Maya had fallen so far behind that completing her degree seemed impossible. The medical bills had consumed her savings, the stress had affected her playing, and the teaching position she'd counted on at the conservatory had been given to someone more reliable. Now, 8 months later, she found herself here in Heritage Square every evening, playing for tourists and office workers hurrying home from their day jobs. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years studying the great classical composers, memorizing complex concertos, and perfecting her technique, only to end up playing simplified pop songs and movie themes for spare change. Tonight, as her fingers moved through a gentle rendition of Clair de Lune, Maya allowed herself to remember what it felt like to perform on a real stage. She closed her eyes and imagined the concert hall at Wellington, with its perfect acoustics and elegant chandeliers. She could almost hear the rustle of programs, the expectant silence before the first note, the thunderous applause that followed a flawless performance. A harsh voice cut through her reverie. "Excuse me, miss, you can't be here." Maya's eyes snapped open to find a security guard standing beside her piano, his arms crossed and his expression stern. He was middle-aged, with graying hair and the tired look of someone who dealt with difficult situations all day long. "I'm sorry." Maya stopped playing, her hands still resting on the keys. "The square closes at 10 p.m. Street performers need to be gone by then. It's almost 10:30. Maya glanced at her phone, surprised to see that he was right. She'd been so lost in her playing that she'd completely lost track of time. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how late it was. I'll pack up right now. You need a permit to perform here anyway," the guard continued, his tone becoming more aggressive. "Have you registered with the city? Paid the fees?" Maya felt her stomach drop. She had been performing here for months without any problems. "I know. I didn't know I needed a permit. No one ever said anything before." "Well, you do, And since you don't have one, I'm going to have to ask you to move along, and don't come back unless you're properly licensed." The guard watched impatiently as Maya hurriedly gathered her sheet music and closed the violin case. Her hands were shaking, partly from the cold and partly from the embarrassment of being kicked out in front of the few people who had been listening to her play. A young couple who had been walking by stopped to watch the confrontation, their expressions sympathetic but their help non-existent. As Maya struggled to maneuver the heavy piano off the square, the security guard called after her. "And get that thing tuned while you're at it." "Sounds terrible." The comment stung more than it should have. Maya knew the piano needed work, but she also knew she couldn't afford to have it serviced. Every dollar she earned went toward rent, food, and the minimum payments on her grandmother's medical bills. There was nothing left over for piano maintenance or street performance permits. By the time Maya managed to get the piano back to her apartment building, it was nearly midnight. Her building didn't have an elevator, and getting the instrument up 3 flights of stairs was always a challenge. Tonight, exhausted and demoralized, it felt impossible. She sat on the bottom step of the stairwell, looking up at the climb ahead of her, and felt tears beginning to form. This wasn't how her life was supposed to turn out. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, dreamed so big. Her grandmother had believed in her talent, had scraped together money for piano lessons when Maya was young, had sat in the front row at every recital and school performance. "You have a gift," Mai Lin used to say. "Music lives in your soul. Never let anyone take that away from you." But sitting in this dingy stairwell at midnight, struggling to move a broken piano up to an apartment she could barely afford, Maya wondered if her grandmother had been wrong. Maybe she didn't have a gift. Maybe she was just another failed musician clinging to impossible dreams. A door opened on the 2nd floor, and her neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at the top of the stairs. She was an elderly woman who worked nights at a nearby hospital and often saw Maya struggling with the piano. "Mija, what are you doing down there? It's so late." Maya wiped her eyes quickly. "Just taking a break." "Long night." Mrs. Rodriguez came down the stairs, her footsteps careful on the worn carpeting. "You look upset. What happened?" "Got kicked out of the square. Apparently I need some kind of permit to perform there. I don't know how I'm going to afford it, and I don't know where else to go." Mrs. Rodriguez sat down on the step beside Maya. "You know, my grandson works for the city, in the permits office. Maybe I can ask him about the requirements, see if there's some kind of hardship program or something." "That's very kind of you, but I doubt I'd qualify for anything like that. I'm not technically homeless or disabled, I'm just struggling." "Struggling counts for something too," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "You're trying to make an honest living with your music. That's more than a lot of people can say." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both women lost in their own thoughts. Finally Mrs. Rodriguez stood up. "Come on, let's get this piano upstairs. Tomorrow is a new day, and you never know what opportunities might come along." Together they managed to get the piano up to Maya's 3rd-floor apartment. It was a tiny studio, with barely enough room for the instrument, but it was home. Maya's grandmother's pictures lined the windowsill, and sheet music was scattered across every available surface. It wasn't much, but it was hers.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Maya sat at the piano bench and played softly, not wanting to disturb her neighbors. Her fingers found their way to one of her grandmother's favorite pieces, a simple melody that Mei Lin had hummed while cooking dinner. The music filled the small space, and for a moment, Maya felt close to her grandmother again. She thought about the security guard's harsh words, about the embarrassment of being kicked out of the square, about the uncertain future that stretched ahead of her. But she also thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's kindness, about the way music still flowed through her fingers even after everything she'd been through, about her grandmother's belief in her talent. Maybe tomorrow would bring new possibilities.
Maybe there was still a chance for her dreams to survive, even if they had to take a different shape than she'd originally planned. As Maya played the last notes of her grandmother's melody, she made a decision. She wouldn't give up. Not yet. The next morning brought unexpected news. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on Maya's door with a cup of coffee and information from her grandson. He says there's a competition happening this weekend, she explained as Maya invited her in. The city is hosting auditions for a new cultural program. Winners get permits to perform in designated areas, plus some kind of small grant to help with equipment and expenses. Maya felt a spark of hope. What kind of competition? Music, art, poetry, all kinds of performers. They're looking for local talent to showcase in the downtown district. My grandson says it's part of some initiative to bring more arts and culture to the city. When are the auditions? Saturday morning. At the Civic Center, Maya's heart raced. Saturday was only 3 days away. She would need to prepare something special, something that would set her apart from all the other hopeful performers who would surely show up. That evening, Maya returned to Heritage Square, but this time she set up in a different corner, one that wasn't technically part of the restricted area. She wanted to practice her audition piece in front of a real audience, to see how people responded to her music. She had chosen one of her original compositions, a piece she'd written during her grandmother's final weeks. It was called May's Garden, inspired by the small rooftop garden her grandmother had tended for decades. The melody captured the peaceful beauty of that space, but also the sadness of watching it fade as Mei Lin became too weak to care for her plants. As Maya played, a small crowd began to gather. Unlike the usual tourists who dropped coins and moved on, these listeners seemed genuinely engaged. An older man in an expensive suit stood at the edge of the crowd, his attention completely focused on the music. A young mother with twin toddlers had stopped her stroller, and even her restless children were quiet, mesmerized by the melody. When Maya finished the piece, the applause was more enthusiastic than usual. Several people dropped bills into her violin case, and the man in the suit approached her directly. "That was beautiful," he said. "Did you write it yourself?" "Yes, sir. It's called May's Garden. I'm Dr. Harrison Webb. I work with the city's Cultural Arts Council." He handed her a business card. "I assume you know about the competition this weekend." Maya's pulse quickened. "Yes, I'm planning to audition." "Good. You should. That piece you just played, it has real emotional depth. It tells a story." He paused, studying her face. "Can I ask about your background? Where did you train?" "Wellington Conservatory. I was working on my master's degree, but..." Maya hesitated. She didn't want to get into the complicated story of her grandmother's illness and her own financial struggles. But life got in the way. "Doctor." Webb's voice was understanding, not judgmental. "Something like that. Well, I hope you'll audition on Saturday. The competition is looking for authenticity, for artists who have something real to say through their work. Technical skill is important, but emotional truth is what separates good musicians from great ones." After Dr. Webb left, Maya packed up her piano with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in months, she felt like she might actually have a chance at something better. The competition could be the break she'd been waiting for, the opportunity to rebuild her musical career on her own terms. Over the next 3 days, Maya practiced obsessively. She refined every phrase of May's Garden, working out the technical challenges while preserving the emotional core that made the piece special. She also prepared a second piece, just in case the judges wanted to hear something different, a complex Bach invention that showcased her classical training. On Friday night she could barely sleep. She kept running through the music in her head, imagining how she would present herself to the judges, worrying about all the things that could go wrong. What if her piano malfunctioned during the audition? What if she froze up under pressure? What if the other competitors were simply better than her? Saturday morning arrived grey and drizzly, matching Maya's nervous mood. She arrived at the Civic Center early, hoping to get a sense of the competition before her audition time. The building was already bustling with activity. Performers of all ages were setting up their equipment, running through last-minute practice sessions, and chatting nervously with one another. Maya wheeled her piano through the lobby, trying not to feel intimidated by some of the other musicians she saw. There was a violinist who looked barely out of high school, but played with the technical precision of a concert master. A jazz pianist had attracted a crowd with his improvisational skills, making complex music look effortless. A classical guitarist was performing what sounded like a piece Maya recognized from her conservatory days, executed flawlessly. The waiting area was filled with the sounds of warm-ups and nervous chatter. Maya found a quiet corner and sat down with her piano, running through scales and arpeggios to keep her fingers limber. The familiar routine helped calm her nerves slightly, but she could still feel her heart racing every time she thought about the audition ahead. Maya Chen, a volunteer with a clipboard, appeared beside her. "You're up in 5 minutes. They'll call you to room B when they're ready." Maya nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. This was it. Everything she'd been working toward, all the dreams she'd been holding on to, all the sacrifices she and her grandmother had made, it all came down to the next few minutes. She thought about Mei Lin, about the woman who had worked double shifts to pay for piano lessons, who had sat through countless recitals and competitions, who had never stopped believing that Maya had something special to offer the world. "Music lives in your soul," she whispered to herself, repeating her grandmother's words like a prayer. The door to room B opened, and Maya was called inside. The audition room was smaller than she'd expected, with harsh fluorescent lighting and beige walls that gave it the atmosphere of a government office rather than a concert venue. 3 judges sat behind a folding table, their expressions neutral and professional. The woman in the center appeared to be in her 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and glasses that made her look stern and unforgiving. Her nameplate read Judge Patricia Morrison, and she was shuffling through papers with the air of someone who had already heard dozens of auditions and found most of them unremarkable. To her left sat a younger man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was checking his phone periodically and barely glanced up when Maya entered the room. The third judge was an older gentleman who seemed more approachable, but he was busy taking notes from the previous audition and didn't look up. Maya positioned her piano in the designated performance area and sat down at the bench. The room was completely silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the scratching of pens on paper. "State your name and the piece you'll be performing," Judge Morrison said without looking up from her paperwork. "Maya Chen. I'll be playing an original composition called May's Garden." Now Judge Morrison did look up, her expression skeptical. "Original? How long have you been composing?" "I've been writing music for about 5 years, but this particular piece is recent." Judge Morrison made a note on her paper. "Well, let's hear it then. You have 5 minutes maximum." Maya placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. The opening notes of May's Garden filled the small room, gentle and contemplative, like morning light filtering through leaves. She had designed the beginning to draw listeners in gradually, to create a sense of peace and beauty that would make them want to hear more. But as she played, Maya became aware that the judges weren't responding the way her street audiences did. Judge Morrison was still shuffling through papers. The younger judge was now openly checking his phone. Only the older gentleman seemed to be paying attention, and even he looked somewhat distracted. Maya tried to focus on the music itself, to let the emotion of the piece carry her forward, regardless of the judges' reactions. The melody moved into its more complex middle section, where themes intertwined and separated, like conversations in a garden, building toward the emotional climax that represented her grandmother's final days. Judge Morrison looked up with an expression of undisguised irritation. "Excuse me, miss. This is supposed to be an audition for public performance permits, not a therapy session." The piece you're playing is quite depressing, and frankly, it's not the kind of music that draws tourists and shoppers to our downtown district." Maya's hands faltered on the keys, the beautiful melody cutting off abruptly. She felt heat rise in her cheeks as embarrassment and anger warred in her chest. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," Maya managed to say. "What I mean," Judge Morrison continued, her voice growing sharper, "is that we're looking for entertainment value here. Upbeat music that creates a positive atmosphere for commerce and tourism. This," she gestured dismissively at the piano, "this sounds like something you'd play at a funeral. It's technically adequate, I suppose, but it's not what we need for this program." The younger judge finally put down his phone. "Yeah, and honestly, the piano sounds pretty rough too. Those keys are sticking, and the tuning is way off. If you can't maintain your instrument properly, maybe street performing isn't for you." Maya felt like she'd been slapped. The criticism of her playing was one thing, but the attack on her grandmother's piano, the instrument that represented everything she'd inherited from the woman who had shaped her life, was devastating. "The piano has sentimental value," Maya said quietly. "It belonged to my grandmother." "Well, sentiment doesn't make up for poor maintenance," Judge Morrison replied coldly. "This is a professional competition, not a charity case. If you want to succeed as a performer, you need to invest in proper equipment and choose material that audiences actually want to hear." The older judge looked uncomfortable with his colleague's harsh treatment, but he didn't speak up to defend Maya. Instead, he made some notes on his paper and avoided eye contact. "Is there anything else you'd like to perform?" Judge Morrison asked, her tone making it clear that she expected the answer to be no. Maya felt tears forming in her eyes, but she was determined not to cry in front of these people who had just dismissed everything she cared about. She thought about the Bach invention she'd prepared as a backup piece, but after the judge's criticism, she couldn't imagine that anything she played would meet their approval. "No," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm finished." "All right then. You can expect to hear about the results within a week. Thank you for your time." Maya packed up her piano quickly, her hands shaking with a combination of anger and humiliation. As she wheeled the instrument toward the door, she could hear Judge Morrison commenting to her colleagues, "I don't know why these amateurs think they can just show up and expect professional opportunities. That girl clearly hasn't done the work necessary to compete at this level." The door closed behind Maya, but the words followed her out into the hallway. She stood there for a moment, feeling completely deflated. The other performers in the waiting area were still warming up, still hopeful about their upcoming auditions. Maya couldn't bear to be around their optimism when her own dreams had just been crushed so thoroughly. She made it all the way to the parking lot before the tears finally came. Sitting in her old Honda with the rain pattering on the windshield, Maya allowed herself to cry for everything she'd lost: her grandmother, her career prospects, her belief in her own talent. Judge Morrison's words echoed in her head: "This is a professional competition, not a charity case." Maybe the judge was right. Maybe Maya had been fooling herself all these months, thinking she could make a living with her music. Maybe she was just another struggling artist who needed to accept reality and find a regular job like everyone else. But as she sat there in the rain, Maya remembered something her grandmother used to say when things got difficult. "Sometimes, Maya, the world tries to tell you that your dreams are too small or too big, too sad or too happy, too different or too ordinary. But your dreams belong to you, and nobody else gets to decide their worth." Maya wiped her eyes and started the car. She wasn't ready to give up yet. Judge Morrison and her colleagues might not understand the value of Maya's garden, but Maya knew what the piece meant to her and to the people who had listened to her play it on the streets. Maybe there were other opportunities out there, other ways to share her music with the world. As she drove home through the grey afternoon, Maya began to think about her next move. The competition had been a disappointment, but it wasn't the end of her story. She still had her music, her grandmother's piano, and the determination that had carried her this far. Sometimes the most important battles weren't won in official audition rooms with professional judges. Sometimes they were won one note at a time, one listener at a time, one small moment of connection at a time. The rain was letting up by the time Maya reached her apartment building. As she struggled to get her piano out of the car, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with an umbrella. "How did it go, Maya?" Maya was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. "Not the way I hoped," she said finally. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe I need to find a different path." Mrs. Rodriguez helped her get the piano up the stairs, and as they reached Maya's floor, the older woman paused. "You know, I've been thinking. My grandson mentioned something else about that cultural program. Apparently they're not just looking for street performers. They're also trying to connect local artists with community organizations, schools, places that need music but can't afford professional entertainment." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you don't need those judges to approve of your music. Maybe you need to find the people who will appreciate what you have to offer. The nursing homes, the community centers, the places where your grandmother's piano would be welcome exactly as it is." Maya considered this as they got the piano settled in her small apartment. Maybe Mrs. Rodriguez was right. Maybe she'd been thinking about success all wrong, focusing on official recognition and permit programs, instead of the real connections she could make through her music. That evening, Maya sat at her grandmother's piano and played Maya's Garden from beginning to end, not for judges or audiences or anyone else, but for herself and for the memory of the woman who had believed in her dreams. The melody filled her small apartment, and for the first time since the disastrous audition, Maya felt peace. Tomorrow she would start exploring those community connections Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned. She would find places where her music was wanted and needed, where the story behind Maya's Garden would be valued rather than dismissed. Judge Morrison might not understand the worth of what Maya had to offer, but somewhere out there, someone would. The rain had stopped completely now, and through her window, Maya could see stars beginning to appear in the clearing sky. It seemed like a good omen, a sign that better days might be ahead. She played her grandmother's favorite lullaby, the simple melody that had first taught her that music could heal and comfort and connect people across all the boundaries that seemed to divide them. Whatever happened next, Maya knew she wouldn't give up on her dreams. They might take a different shape than she'd originally planned, but they would survive. Music lived in her soul, just as her grandmother had always said, and nobody, not Judge Morrison, not financial struggles, not even her own moments of doubt, could take that away from her. 3 weeks had passed since the devastating audition at the Civic Center, and Maya had thrown herself into exploring the community connections that Mrs. Rodriguez had suggested. She'd reached out to nursing homes, senior centers and community organizations, offering to perform for free in exchange for the opportunity to share her music with people who might actually appreciate it. The response had been overwhelmingly positive. Within days, Maya had bookings at 3 different facilities, and word was spreading through the network of social workers and activity coordinators who served the city's most vulnerable populations. Her calendar was filling up with performances at places that welcomed her grandmother's piano exactly as it was, where the emotion in her original compositions was seen as a gift rather than a liability. At Sunset Manor, a nursing home on the east side of town, Maya had become a regular fixture every Tuesday afternoon.
The residents gathered in the common room, some in wheelchairs, others shuffling slowly with walkers, all of them eager to hear whatever she chose to play. Unlike the judges at the Civic Center, these listeners understood that music wasn't just entertainment. It was memory, comfort, connection to times and places that lived now only in their hearts. During her 3rd visit to Sunset Manor, Maya met Eleanor Whitman, a 92-year-old former piano teacher who had been silent since arriving at the facility 6 months earlier. The staff had explained that Eleanor suffered from severe depression following the death of her husband of 70 years and hadn't spoken to anyone since her arrival. When Maya began playing Maya's Garden, something shifted in Eleanor's expression.
The elderly woman leaned forward in her wheelchair, her rheumy eyes suddenly alert and focused. As the melody reached its emotional climax, tears began streaming down Eleanor's weathered cheeks. "That's beautiful, dear," Eleanor whispered when the piece ended, her first words in months according to the amazed nursing staff. "It sounds like grief and love all mixed together, like life itself." Maya knelt beside Eleanor's wheelchair. "My grandmother inspired it. She passed away last year. She must have been very special. I can hear it in the music, all the tenderness, all the loss. You have a gift, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Eleanor's words stayed with Maya as she continued her community performances. At the children's hospital, young patients listened with rapt attention as she played gentle melodies that seemed to ease their pain. At the homeless shelter downtown, adults who had lost everything found solace in music that acknowledged their struggles without trying to fix them. Each performance reinforced what Maya was beginning to understand about her calling as a musician. The judges at the Civic Center had wanted entertainment that would boost tourism and commerce, but Maya's true talent lay in creating moments of human connection, in offering comfort to people who needed it most. Still, the financial pressure was mounting. The community performances paid nothing, and Maya's savings from street performing were dwindling rapidly. She'd applied for several part-time jobs, but her irregular schedule of community performances made it difficult to commit to traditional employment. The medical bills from her grandmother's treatment continued to arrive monthly, relentless reminders of debts that seemed impossible to overcome. It was during this period of financial stress that Maya received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, belonging to someone who identified herself as Rebecca Santos, assistant to the mayor. "Miss Chen, I understand you've been performing at various community organizations around the city." Maya's heart sank. Had she violated some regulation she wasn't aware of? Were the community performances somehow illegal without proper permits? "Yes, ma'am, I hope that's not a problem. I've been careful not to solicit donations or—" "Oh no, you misunderstand," Rebecca interrupted. "The mayor's office has been hearing wonderful things about your performances. We'd actually like to discuss an opportunity with you." Maya sat down heavily on her small couch, relief washing over her. "What kind of opportunity?" "The mayor is hosting a private fundraising dinner next week for the Children's Hospital Foundation. It's a very exclusive event. Major donors, city council members, prominent business leaders. We're looking for someone to provide background music during the cocktail reception. The pay would be $500 for 2 hours of work." $500? Maya almost dropped the phone. That was more than she typically made in 2 weeks of street performing, and it would cover her rent for the month with money left over for groceries. "That sounds wonderful," Maya said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "When would you need an answer?" "The event is this Saturday evening at the Riverside Hotel Ballroom. Very formal affair. Would you be available?" Saturday was 5 days away. Maya quickly ran through her mental calendar. She had a performance at the Senior Center Friday afternoon, but Saturday was free. "Yes, I can do it. What kind of music would you like me to play?" "Light classical, jazz standards, that sort of thing. Nothing too emotional or attention-grabbing. The music should enhance the atmosphere without overwhelming the conversation." Maya winced slightly at the instruction to avoid emotional music, but $500 was $500. She could certainly play light background music for a few hours if it meant financial stability. "I understand completely. Should I bring my own piano?" There was a pause. "About that, we assumed you'd have access to a professional-grade instrument. The hotel has a beautiful grand piano in the ballroom, but we'd need to ensure you're comfortable performing on it. Could you come in for a brief audition this Thursday afternoon?" Another audition. Maya's stomach tightened as she remembered the humiliation at the Civic Center, but this was different. This was a paid opportunity, not a competition, and the mayor's assistant seemed genuinely interested in hiring her. "Of course. What time works best?" 2 o'clock. "Ask for Rebecca Santos at the hotel front desk." "Oh, and Miss Chen, this is quite an important event for the mayor's office. We're counting on you to provide exactly the right ambiance." After hanging up the phone, Maya spent the rest of the day practicing the kind of repertoire she imagined would be appropriate for a high-end fundraising dinner. She worked through jazz standards like The Way You Look Tonight and Fly Me to the Moon, classical pieces like Bach's Air on the G string, and contemporary songs that had been arranged for solo piano. The familiar territory of these well-known pieces felt different from her original compositions. There was safety in playing music that had been tested by countless performers, music that was guaranteed to be inoffensive and pleasant, but there was also something hollow about it, as if she was trading away the part of her musicianship that made her unique in exchange for commercial acceptability. Thursday afternoon arrived with unexpected sunshine, and Maya dressed in her most professional outfit, a black dress she'd bought for conservatory recitals, paired with low heels that she hoped would look appropriate for such an upscale venue. The Riverside Hotel was even more impressive than she'd expected, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated luxury that spoke of serious money. Rebecca Santos turned out to be a polished woman in her 30s, wearing an immaculate business suit and carrying herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to organizing high-profile events. She led Maya through the hotel's elegant corridors to the ballroom, which was being prepared for Saturday's dinner. "This is stunning," Maya breathed, taking in the soaring ceiling, ornate moldings, and tall windows that overlooked the city skyline. "The mayor spares no expense for the Children's Hospital fundraiser," Rebecca explained. "Last year we raised over $200,000 in a single evening. These donors take their philanthropy seriously, and they expect everything to be perfect." The piano was indeed magnificent, a concert grand Steinway that probably cost more than Maya made in several years. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, marveling at the instrument's responsiveness and the richness of its tone. "Feel free to play something," Rebecca said, settling into one of the chairs that had been arranged around small cocktail tables. "I'd like to get a sense of your style." Maya chose Autumn Leaves, a jazz standard that allowed her to demonstrate both technical skill and musical sensitivity without being too flashy. As she played, she was aware of Rebecca taking notes on a small pad, evaluating not just her performance but her overall presentation. "That was lovely," Rebecca said when Maya finished. "Very appropriate for the atmosphere we're trying to create. Could you play something a bit more classical? Some of our donors are quite traditional in their musical tastes." Maya transitioned into a Mozart sonata, one she'd performed many times during her conservatory years. The familiar piece felt comfortable under her fingers, and she could see Rebecca nodding approvingly as the elegant melody filled the ballroom. "Perfect. I think you'll be exactly what we're looking for." Rebecca closed her notepad and stood up. "The event begins at 6 o'clock Saturday evening. We'd like you to start playing during the cocktail reception and continue through dinner service. Is there anything special you'll need?" "Just the music I'll be performing. I assume you'd prefer I stick to well-known pieces." "Absolutely. Nothing too modern or experimental. These are conservative donors who appreciate traditional music. Think of yourself as providing elegant background ambiance." Maya nodded, though part of her felt a familiar pang of disappointment. Once again she was being asked to suppress the part of her musicianship that felt most authentic in favor of playing it safe. As she walked back through the hotel lobby, Maya reminded herself that this was exactly the kind of opportunity she needed. Professional musicians had to be versatile, able to play what the situation demanded rather than only what they personally preferred. The $500 would give her breathing room to continue her community performances without worrying about immediate financial crisis. The next 2 days passed in intensive preparation. Maya practiced for hours, building a repertoire of appropriate pieces and working on seamless transitions between songs. She had her black dress professionally cleaned and bought new sheet music for several pieces she wanted to add to her program. Saturday evening arrived clear and crisp, with the kind of perfect weather that seemed designed for elegant fundraising dinners. Maya arrived at the hotel 2 hours early to familiarize herself with the piano and the acoustics of the room as it was being set up for the event. The ballroom had been transformed into a sophisticated dining space, with round tables covered in white linen and centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath. The lighting had been dimmed to create an intimate atmosphere, and servers were making final preparations for the arrival of guests. Maya took her place at the piano and began with gentle background music as the first donors arrived. The guests were exactly what she'd expected: well-dressed professionals, older couples whose jewelry and clothing spoke of significant wealth, younger business leaders who moved through the room with the confidence of success. The music seemed to be working exactly as intended. Conversations flowed smoothly around the cocktail tables, donors mingled and networked, and Maya's playing provided a pleasant soundtrack that enhanced rather than dominated the atmosphere. Several guests nodded approvingly in her direction, and she could see Rebecca Santos moving through the crowd with obvious satisfaction. As the evening progressed and guests moved to their dinner tables, Maya continued playing, adjusting her repertoire to match the energy of the room. During the salad course, she played gentle classical pieces. As the main course was served and conversations became more animated, she shifted to slightly more upbeat jazz standards. It was during the dessert service that things began to change. Maya had been playing for nearly 3 hours, and her carefully planned repertoire was running low. She'd cycled through most of her prepared pieces and was starting to repeat some of the earlier songs when she noticed a commotion near the head table. A young girl, perhaps 10 years old, had entered the ballroom accompanied by a woman who appeared to be her mother. The child was clearly a patient from the children's hospital. She was pale and thin, wearing a colorful headscarf that suggested she was undergoing chemotherapy. Hospital identification bracelets were visible on her small wrists. Maya later learned that this was Sofia Martinez, the hospital's current poster child for the fundraising campaign. Sofia had been battling leukemia for 18 months, and her family's story was featured prominently in the evening's program materials. She was scheduled to give a brief speech about the importance of the donors' contributions to families like hers. But as Sofia approached the microphone that had been set up near Maya's piano, it became clear that something was wrong. The little girl looked frightened and overwhelmed by the room full of adults in formal attire. Her mother knelt beside her, whispering encouragement, but Sofia shook her head and stepped back from the microphone. "I can't," Maya heard the child whisper. "There are too many people. I'm scared." The room had grown quiet as guests realized that the scheduled presentation wasn't going as planned. Rebecca Santos appeared at Sofia's side, trying to offer gentle encouragement, but the little girl was clearly too nervous to speak to the crowd. Without thinking about the consequences or her instructions to stick to background music, Maya began to play. Not one of her prepared pieces, not a jazz standard or classical selection, but the opening notes of May's Garden, the melody that had been dismissed as too depressing by Judge Morrison, too emotional for professional settings, too personal for commercial success. But in this moment, as a scared little girl stood frozen in front of a room full of strangers, the gentle, comforting melody seemed exactly right. Maya played softly at first, just loud enough for Sofia to hear, and gradually the child's tense shoulders began to relax. The music spoke of gardens and memories, of love that transcended loss, of beauty that could emerge from the most difficult circumstances. As Maya played, Sofia turned toward the piano with curious eyes, no longer focused on the intimidating crowd behind her. Maya caught Sofia's eye and smiled encouragingly, never stopping her playing. The melody swelled slightly, becoming more confident, and something magical happened. Sofia began to nod along with the rhythm, her fear gradually replaced by wonder at the music that seemed to understand exactly how she felt. "That's pretty," Sofia said, her voice now audible through the sound system. "It sounds like my mommy singing to me when I'm sad." Maya transitioned the melody into a different key, making it brighter and more hopeful, while maintaining its essential gentleness. Sofia stepped closer to the microphone, no longer afraid, but curious about this music that seemed to be just for her. "My name is Sofia," the little girl said, her voice stronger now. I'm 10 years old and I have cancer, but I'm getting better because of the doctors and nurses at the hospital." The room remained completely silent, mesmerized by the combination of Sophia's innocent bravery and Maya's supportive musical backdrop. Maya continued playing, adjusting her dynamics to support Sophia's speech rather than compete with it. "The hospital is like a big family," Sophia continued, gaining confidence as she spoke. "When I was really sick and couldn't get out of bed, they brought music to my room. Musicians like this lady came and played songs that made me feel better. Music is medicine too, you know. It fixes the part of you that doesn't show up on the doctor's tests." Maya felt tears forming in her eyes as Sophia spoke about the healing power of music. This was exactly why she had started performing at community organizations, exactly what the judges at the Civic Center had failed to understand about her work. "I know you're all here to help kids like me," Sophia said, looking around the room with surprising poise. "Thank you for caring about us. We need doctors and medicine, but we need love too, and music is how love sounds." As Sophia finished speaking, Maya brought May's garden to a gentle close. The applause that followed was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced, not polite appreciation for background music, but genuine emotion and gratitude from people who had been moved by the combination of Sophia's words and Maya's musical support. Sophia skipped over to the piano before returning to her mother, and in a voice that carried clearly through the room she said, "That was the most beautiful song I ever heard. It made me brave." The comment hung in the air as Sophia and her mother were escorted back to their table. The formal program continued with remarks from the mayor and hospital administrators, but Maya could sense that the energy in the room had shifted. People were wiping their eyes, having quiet conversations with their dinner companions, and looking at Maya with expressions of newfound respect. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, several donors approached the piano to speak with Maya personally. They asked about her music, her background, and where they might hear her perform again. One couple, the Hendersons, pressed a business card into her hand and asked if she would consider playing at their daughter's wedding. But it was Rebecca Santos's reaction that surprised Maya the most. Instead of being angry about the deviation from the approved program, Rebecca seemed genuinely moved by what had happened with Sophia. "I have to admit," Rebecca said as the ballroom emptied, "when you started playing that piece, I was concerned it might be too emotional for the setting. But you read the situation perfectly. Sophia needed that support, and you provided it instinctively." Maya nodded, still processing what had happened. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. I know you asked for background music, but when I saw how frightened she was, don't apologize. That was the most authentic moment of the entire evening." The donors were moved in a way that goes beyond writing checks. You helped them connect emotionally with the cause they're supporting. Rebecca paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "Maya, I have to ask, where did that piece come from? It's not something I've heard before. I wrote it about my grandmother. She passed away last year, and the melody captures some of what I felt about losing her. I call it May's Garden. It's extraordinary." "Have you written other original pieces?" Maya nodded. "Quite a few, actually, but I've been told they're too personal, too emotional for professional settings." Rebecca shook her head. "Whoever told you that was wrong. What happened tonight with Sophia, that connection, that authenticity, that's what makes music truly powerful. Anyone can play background music competently. But what you did tonight, that was artistry." As Maya packed up her sheet music and prepared to leave, Rebecca handed her an envelope containing her payment, plus a generous tip from several grateful donors. But more importantly, she handed her a business card with additional contact information. The mayor's office organizes several other events throughout the year, some more formal like tonight, others more community-focused. I'd like to keep you in mind for future opportunities. But next time, don't feel like you have to stick so rigidly to safe repertoire. Your original music is clearly something special." Maya walked out of the Riverside Hotel feeling fundamentally changed. For months she'd been struggling with the tension between artistic authenticity and commercial viability, between the music that mattered to her personally and the music that seemed to be professionally acceptable. Tonight had shown her that those weren't necessarily opposing forces. The most powerful moment of the evening had happened when she stopped trying to be invisible background music and started responding to the human need in front of her. Sophia had needed support and comfort, and Maya's most personal composition had provided exactly that. The drive home through the quiet city streets gave Maya time to reflect on everything that had happened. The financial pressure that had been crushing her for months was temporarily relieved, but more than that, she felt like she'd rediscovered her purpose as a musician. Judge Morrison at the Civic Center had criticized May's Garden as depressing and inappropriate for public performance. But tonight that same piece had helped a frightened child find her courage, had moved wealthy donors to tears, and had created the kind of authentic moment that Rebecca Santos said was the goal of all their fundraising efforts. Maya thought about her grandmother, about May Lin's belief that music lived in the soul and couldn't be taken away by anyone. Tonight she'd proven that belief correct. When she'd stopped trying to conform to other people's expectations and started trusting her own musical instincts, she'd created something beautiful and meaningful. As she pulled into the parking lot of her apartment building, Maya saw Mrs. Rodriguez waiting by the entrance, clearly having stayed up late to hear about the evening's events. "Moja, how did it go?" Mrs. Rodriguez called as Maya approached with her sheet music case. "Better than I ever imagined," Maya replied, and began to tell her neighbor about Sophia, about the music that had bridged the gap between fear and courage, about the realization that her most personal compositions might also be her most powerful professional tools. They talked on the front steps for almost an hour, Maya describing the elegant ballroom, the intimidating donors, and the moment when everything had changed because one scared little girl had needed exactly what Maya's music could provide. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Mrs. Rodriguez said as they finally headed inside. "She always knew you had something special to offer the world." That night, Maya sat at her grandmother's piano and played May's Garden from beginning to end, not for judges or donors or anyone else's approval, but simply because it was beautiful and true and hers. The melody filled her small apartment, just as it had filled the grand ballroom, carrying the same emotional depth regardless of the setting or audience. For the first time since the disaster at the Civic Center audition, Maya felt genuinely hopeful about her future as a musician. She'd proven to herself that authenticity and commercial success didn't have to be mutually exclusive, that the music closest to her heart might also be the music that could sustain her financially. Tomorrow she would continue her community performances, but with a new understanding of their value. She would keep writing original compositions, but without the fear that they were too personal or emotional for professional settings. And she would remember Sophia's words about music being how love sounds, because that was exactly what Maya wanted her music to be, an expression of love that could reach people when they needed it most. The judges at the Civic Center might never understand the worth of what Maya had to offer, but tonight had shown her that there were other audiences out there, other opportunities, other ways to build a meaningful career in music. She didn't need their permission or approval. She just needed to trust in the gift her grandmother had recognized years ago and keep sharing it with the world, one note at a time. 2 months after the fundraising dinner that changed everything, Maya stood in the office of Wellington Conservatory's Dean of Student Affairs, holding a letter that she'd read at least a dozen times since it arrived in her mailbox 3 days earlier. The official letterhead bore news she'd never dared to hope for: a full scholarship to complete her master's degree, plus a graduate assistantship that would provide a modest living stipend. "Miss Chen, I have to tell you that this is highly unusual," Dean Patricia Carlyle explained from behind her mahogany desk. "We don't typically admit students who've been absent for over a year, and full scholarships for returning students are even rarer." Maya nodded, still somewhat in disbelief about the turn her life had taken. I understand, Dean Carlisle. I'm incredibly grateful for this opportunity. The scholarship comes courtesy of the Henderson Foundation. Apparently, Margaret and Robert Henderson were quite moved by your performance at the Children's Hospital fundraiser. They've been major supporters of our music program for years, but they specifically requested that their donation be used to support what they called authentic musical voices that serve the community. The Hendersons. Maya remembered the elegant couple who had approached her after the fundraiser, pressing their business card into her hand and asking about her availability for private events. What she hadn't known at the time was that Robert Henderson served on Wellington Conservatory's board of trustees and that their foundation had been quietly supporting promising musicians for decades. There are conditions, of course, Dean Carlisle continued. Your assistantship will involve working with our new community outreach program. We're launching an initiative to connect conservatory students with local organizations that could benefit from musical programming. Given your experience performing at hospitals, nursing homes and community centers, you'd be perfect to help coordinate and oversee these partnerships. Maya felt a surge of excitement. Not only would she be able to complete her degree, but she'd be doing exactly the kind of work that had brought her the most satisfaction over the past few months. That sounds wonderful. When would I be able to start? Fall semester if you're interested. There would be some catch-up coursework required, given your time away, but your professors remember you as an exceptional student. Dr. Williams in particular has been following your recent performances and is eager to work with you on developing your original compositions. Dr. Williams. Maya's former composition professor had been one of her favorite instructors before her grandmother's illness forced her to withdraw from school. The idea of working with him again, of having the time and resources to properly develop her musical voice, felt almost too good to be true. I should mention, Dean Carlisle added, that your performance at the fundraiser has been generating quite a bit of interest in the local music community. We've had several inquiries about booking you for other events. It seems that what happened with the little girl has become something of a legend. Maya smiled at the thought of Sophia. She'd visited the Children's Hospital twice since the fundraiser, bringing her portable keyboard to play for patients in the pediatric ward. Sophia was responding well to treatment, and her energy seemed to increase every time Maya played May's Garden. The little girl had even asked if she could learn to play the melody herself someday. Over the following weeks, Maya found herself busier than she'd been since before her grandmother's illness. The Henderson Foundation scholarship had lifted the crushing financial pressure that had dominated her life for months, but it had also opened doors she hadn't expected. Rebecca Santos from the mayor's office had referred her to other event planners, and suddenly Maya's calendar was filling with bookings for weddings, corporate events, and private parties. The difference now was that these clients weren't asking her to disappear into the background. Word had spread about the young pianist who played original compositions that moved people to tears, who could read a room and provide exactly the emotional support a moment required. Instead of being told to stick to safe, inoffensive repertoire, Maya was being specifically hired for her ability to create authentic emotional connections through music. At the Riverside Country Club, Maya performed for a retirement party honoring Dr. Sarah Kim, a pediatric oncologist who had spent 40 years treating children with cancer. Kim's colleagues shared stories about her dedication and compassion. Maya found herself improvising subtle musical responses to their words, creating a soundtrack that enhanced rather than competed with their memories. When Dr. Kim herself stood to address the gathering, she paused at the microphone and listened to Maya's gentle accompaniment. "You know," she said to the crowd, "in all my years of medicine, I've learned that healing involves more than just treating symptoms. It requires attending to the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. This beautiful music reminds me why the arts are so crucial in healthcare settings. They feed the part of us that medical procedures can't reach." After the event, Dr. Kim approached Maya personally. "I've been thinking about retiring, but tonight has given me a new idea. I'd like to discuss the possibility of establishing a music therapy program at the Children's Hospital. Would you be interested in helping design something like that? Maya was intrigued. Music therapy was a specialized field that required additional training, but the idea of creating a formal program that combined her musical skills with her desire to help healing patients was incredibly appealing. I'd love to explore that possibility. I'm actually starting graduate school again in the fall, and I could potentially incorporate music therapy coursework into my degree program. Perfect. Let me introduce you to some colleagues who've been researching the therapeutic benefits of music in pediatric settings. I think you might be exactly what our hospital needs. As summer progressed, Maya's life began to take on a shape she'd never imagined possible. Her community performances continued, but they were now part of a broader network of musical activities that included paid private events, collaborative projects with healthcare professionals, and preparation for her return to formal education. The old tensions between artistic authenticity and financial necessity had largely dissolved. Maya discovered that the music closest to her heart was also the music that clients valued most highly. Her original compositions, once dismissed as too emotional or personal, were now her most requested pieces. Couples wanted her to play May's Garden at their weddings because it spoke to the complexity of love, the joy and the vulnerability, the beauty and the inevitable loss that made each moment precious. One afternoon in July, Maya received a phone call that surprised her more than any opportunity that had come her way since the fundraising dinner. The voice belonged to Judge Patricia Morrison from the Civic Center audition that had been so devastating months earlier. "Miss Chen, I hope you remember me. I was one of the judges at the cultural arts competition you auditioned for last spring." Maya's stomach tightened involuntarily. She remembered Judge Morrison all too clearly. The dismissive attitude, the harsh criticism of her piano's condition, the cold assessment that May's Garden was too depressing for public performance. "Yes, I remember. I'm calling because I owe you an apology. I've been hearing about your work around the city, the fundraising dinner, the community performances, the hospital visits. It's clear that I misjudged both your talent and the value of your original compositions." Maya was too stunned to respond immediately. An apology was the last thing she'd expected from the woman who had crushed her dreams so thoroughly. "The truth is," Judge Morrison continued, "I've been judging these competitions for years, and I've become focused on technical proficiency and commercial viability at the expense of artistic authenticity. What you played for us was actually quite beautiful. I was too narrow-minded to recognize it." "Thank you for saying that," Maya replied, though she wasn't sure how to process this unexpected reversal. "I'm calling for another reason as well. The city's cultural arts program is being restructured, and we're looking for someone to serve as artistic director for a new initiative focused on community-based performances. The position would involve identifying and supporting local musicians who want to bring their work to underserved populations. Based on everything I've heard about your recent activities, you'd be ideal for the role." Maya almost laughed at the irony. The same program that had rejected her as unsuitable for street performing was now offering her a leadership position in community arts programming. "The position comes with a significant salary and benefits," Judge Morrison continued, "plus resources to support other artists who want to do the kind of work you've been pioneering. Would you be interested in discussing it further?"
Maya considered the offer carefully. The salary would certainly be attractive, and the opportunity to help other musicians find their authentic voices was appealing. But she was also committed to completing her degree and exploring the music therapy program Dr. Kim had proposed. "It sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Maya said finally. "Could we discuss the possibility of a part-time or consulting arrangement? I'm returning to graduate school in the fall, but I'd definitely be interested in contributing to the program in whatever way works for both of us. I think we could work something out. Why don't we meet next week to discuss the details?" After ending the call, Maya sat at her grandmother's piano and played through May's Garden once more, marveling at how completely her circumstances had changed.
The piece that Judge Morrison had once criticized as unsuitable for public performance was now the composition that had opened doors to opportunities she'd never imagined. The phone rang again, interrupting her reflection. This time it was Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs. "Maya, there's someone here to see you, a lady from the newspaper." Maya looked out her window to see a car with press plates parked on the street. She'd spoken to a few reporters over the past months as her story spread through the local music community, but she wasn't expecting anyone today. The woman waiting in the lobby introduced herself as Jennifer Walsh from the city's Arts and Culture Weekly. She was interested in writing a feature story about Maya's journey from struggling street performer to sought-after composer and community advocate. "What interests me most," Jennifer explained as they settled in Maya's small apartment, "is how you've managed to build a sustainable career while staying true to your artistic vision. So many musicians feel like they have to choose between authenticity and financial success." Maya considered the question as she made tea for her visitor. "I think the key was realizing that authenticity and commercial appeal aren't opposites. People are hungry for genuine emotional connection, especially in music. When I stopped trying to be what I thought other people wanted and started trusting my own musical instincts, that's when everything changed." "Tell me about that night at the fundraising dinner. What made you decide to play your original composition instead of sticking to the background music you'd been hired to provide?" "There was a little girl who was supposed to speak to the donors, but she was too frightened. She needed support in that moment, and May's Garden was the piece that felt right. I wasn't thinking about the professional consequences, I was just responding to what the situation required. And that response ended up transforming your career." Maya nodded. "It taught me that the music that matters most to me personally can also be the most professionally valuable. I don't have to choose between paying my bills and creating meaningful art." As the interview continued, Maya reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. The grandmother who had believed in her talent even when Maya herself had doubts, the devastating audition that had seemed to close all doors, the community performances that had sustained her during the darkest period, the moment of authentic connection with Sophia that had changed everything. Each experience had been necessary, even the painful ones. Without the rejection at the Civic Center audition, Maya might never have discovered her true calling as a community-focused musician. Without the financial desperation of street performing, she might never have developed the resilience and authenticity that now defined her work. The following month, Maya's story appeared on the front page of the arts section under the headline "From Street Corner to Concert Hall: How One Pianist Found Success by Staying True to Her Voice." The article generated more interest than Maya had anticipated, leading to interview requests from radio stations and invitations to speak at music education conferences. But the response that meant the most came from other struggling musicians who reached out to share their own stories and ask for advice. Maya began receiving letters and emails from artists who felt caught between their authentic creative voices and the commercial pressures of trying to make a living with their art. A young violinist in Detroit wrote about her struggle to balance classical training with her love of folk music. A singer-songwriter in Portland described her frustration with venues that wanted her to play only covers of popular songs. A jazz pianist in Chicago shared his experience of being told his original compositions were too complex for mainstream audiences. Maya responded to each message personally, sharing what she'd learned about the false choice between authenticity and commercial success. She began to see her own journey not as a unique success story, but as part of a larger conversation about how artists could build sustainable careers while maintaining their creative integrity. By the time fall semester arrived, Maya's life had stabilized in ways she'd never thought possible. Her scholarship covered tuition and provided a modest stipend. Her performance bookings generated additional income that allowed her to save money for the first time in years. Most importantly, she was doing work that felt meaningful and aligned with her values. On her first day back at Wellington Conservatory, Maya walked through the familiar hallways with a sense of completion rather than return. She was the same person who had left this place 18 months earlier, but her understanding of what it meant to be a professional musician had been completely transformed. Dr. Williams greeted her warmly in his office, surrounded by the same cluttered stacks of sheet music and reference books that Maya remembered from her previous studies. "Maya, I have to tell you how impressed I've been with your work over the past year. The performance at the fundraising dinner, your community programming, your original compositions, this is exactly the kind of musicianship the world needs more of." "Thank you, Dr. Williams. I have to admit, it's taken me a while to understand that my personal musical voice could also be professionally valuable. That's the lesson every serious musician has to learn eventually. Technical skill is important, but it's not enough. The musicians who truly matter are the ones who have something authentic to say through their art." They spent the next hour discussing Maya's plans for her thesis project. She wanted to explore the intersection of composition and community service, potentially developing a framework that other musicians could use to create meaningful work in healthcare and social service settings. "It sounds like you're pioneering a new model for musical careers, Dr. Williams observed, one that integrates artistic excellence with community impact. I think your thesis could make a significant contribution to how we think about the role of musicians in society." As Maya left the conservatory that afternoon, she walked past Heritage Square where she'd spent so many evenings playing for tourists and passers-by. The old piano wasn't there anymore. She'd finally been able to afford proper storage for her grandmother's instrument, but she could see other street performers scattered throughout the plaza. A young man with a guitar was playing covers of popular songs for a small crowd of listeners. His technique was competent, his song choices safe and familiar, but Maya could sense that he was holding something back, playing what he thought people wanted to hear rather than what moved him personally. She thought about approaching him, about sharing what she'd learned about the power of authenticity in performance. But then she remembered her own journey, how the most important lessons had come through experience rather than advice. Everyone had to find their own path to artistic authenticity. Instead, Maya dropped a $20 bill in the young man's guitar case and walked on, carrying with her the knowledge that dreams deferred weren't necessarily dreams denied. Sometimes the detours and setbacks that seemed like endings were actually beginnings, leading to destinations more beautiful than anything that could have been planned. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory as Maya headed home. "Music lives in your soul and nobody can take that away from you." It had taken a journey through loss, rejection, and near despair for Maya to fully understand those words, but now she carried them as both comfort and truth. The scared young woman who had been humiliated by Judge Morrison at the Civic Center audition no longer existed. In her place stood someone who understood that authentic artistic expression wasn't a luxury to be indulged when circumstances permitted, but the foundation upon which meaningful careers and lives could be built. Maya had learned that the music closest to her heart was also the music that could change the world one note at a time. 5 years had passed since Maya Chen first sat at her grandmother's broken piano in Heritage Square, playing for spare change and wondering if her dreams were foolish delusions. Now, standing in the wings of Carnegie Hall's Weill Recital Hall, she could barely believe the journey that had brought her to this moment. The invitation to perform at the National Music Therapy Conference had arrived 8 months earlier, recognizing Maya's pioneering work in developing community-based musical healing programs. Her master's thesis, Harmony and Healing, integrating original composition with therapeutic practice, had been published in the Journal of Music and Medicine and was being implemented in hospitals across the country. Tonight's performance would mark the culmination of everything she'd built since that transformative evening at the Children's Hospital fundraiser. The audience included leading researchers, practicing music therapists, healthcare administrators, and philanthropists who supported arts in medicine initiatives. But despite the prestigious venue and influential gathering, Maya felt surprisingly calm. Dr. Sarah Kim, now Maya's colleague and co-director of the Children's Hospital Music Therapy Program, appeared beside her with an encouraging smile. How are you feeling, Maya? Ready to show them what we've accomplished? Maya adjusted the sleeve of her midnight blue performance dress, a far cry from the faded clothes she'd worn during her street performing days. I keep thinking about Sophia. She should be here tonight. She is here in spirit, and her story is part of what you're sharing with this audience. Sophia Martinez had passed away 2 years earlier, her leukemia returning despite the treatments that had initially given her family hope. But in the final months of her life, she had become one of Maya's most devoted students, learning to play simple melodies on a small keyboard that the hospital had provided for her room. Even when her strength faded, Sophia continued to hum May's Garden, telling the nurses that the song helped her remember what love sounded like. The loss had devastated Maya, forcing her to confront the heartbreaking reality that music couldn't heal every wound or save every life. But Sophia's mother, Elena Martinez, had helped Maya understand that healing didn't always mean curing. Sometimes it meant providing comfort, connection, and dignity in the face of inevitable loss. "Miss Chen, you're on in 2 minutes," a stage manager whispered, breaking Maya's reverie. Maya walked to the piano, a magnificent Steinway concert grand that responded to her touch like a living thing. The hall was full, nearly 600 people who had come to hear about the intersection of music and medicine. As she settled onto the bench and looked out at the sea of faces, Maya's mind drifted to the others who had shaped her journey. Eleanor Whitman from Sunset Manor, the 92-year-old former piano teacher who had broken her months of silence after hearing May's Garden. Eleanor had become Maya's mentor in understanding how music could unlock memories and emotions in patients with dementia. They had collaborated on developing a program that used familiar melodies to help elderly patients access their personal histories, even when other forms of communication had become difficult. Roberto Santos, the maintenance worker at the Roosevelt Community Center, who had first encouraged Maya during her homeless shelter performances. He now served on the board of the non-profit organization Maya had founded to train musicians in therapeutic techniques. His practical wisdom about reaching people where they were, regardless of their circumstances, had become a cornerstone of Maya's approach. Mrs. Rodriguez, her former neighbor, who had provided crucial support during Maya's darkest period. She had moved in with her daughter in Phoenix, but they still exchanged letters every month. In her most recent note, Mrs. Rodriguez had written, "I always knew you had something special, Mia. I just didn't know it would help so many people." The applause died down as Maya began to speak, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's excellent acoustics. "When I was 23 years old, I thought I knew what it meant to be a musician. I believed success was measured by the prestige of concert halls, the recognition of critics, and the approval of academic institutions. I had no idea that my most meaningful work would happen in hospital rooms, nursing homes, and community centers with people who had never heard of the great classical composers, but understood everything about the power of music to heal." Maya moved to the piano and played the opening measures of May's Garden, the melody that had become her signature piece. The familiar notes filled the hall, carrying with them the weight of everything that had followed that first desperate composition, written during her grandmother's final illness. "This piece was born from grief," Maya continued, her hands never leaving the keys. "I wrote it during my grandmother's battle with cancer, trying to capture the beauty and pain of watching someone you love fade away. For years I was told it was too emotional, too personal, too depressing for professional performance. But what I've learned is that the music that comes from our deepest experiences of loss and love is often the music that can reach others in their moments of greatest need." She transitioned into a gentle variation of the theme, one she had developed for use in pediatric settings. "This is how Mia's Garden sounds when I play it for children facing serious illness. The melody is the same, but the tempo is slower, the dynamics softer. I learned this adaptation from a little girl named Sophia, who taught me that music isn't just about technical perfection or artistic achievement. It's about creating connections between people, building bridges across the isolation that illness and trauma can create." Maya shared the story of Sophia's courage at the fundraising dinner, how a frightened child had found her voice with the support of music that acknowledged her fear while offering hope. She described the development of the hospital's music therapy program, the research documenting improved patient outcomes, and the network of similar programs that had been established in medical facilities nationwide. We've learned that music therapy isn't about playing background music or providing entertainment, Maya explained. It's about using the fundamental human response to rhythm, melody, and harmony to support healing processes that go beyond what traditional medicine can accomplish alone. When a stroke patient relearns speech by singing familiar songs, when a child with autism finds social connection through musical play, when an elderly person with Alzheimer's remembers their spouse's name while humming their wedding song, we're witnessing the power of music to access parts of the brain and spirit that remain intact even when other functions are compromised. Maya played excerpts from other compositions she had written for specific therapeutic applications. Morning Light had been created for patients in rehabilitation settings, its gradually building energy designed to motivate physical therapy exercises. Safe Harbor provided comfort for families in hospice situations, its gentle waves of sound creating space for grief and acceptance. New Beginnings celebrated recovery milestones, its triumphant themes marking transitions from illness back to health. Each piece demonstrated how Maya had learned to compose with both artistic integrity and therapeutic purpose, never sacrificing musical beauty for clinical effectiveness or clinical effectiveness for artistic expression. The audience listened with rapt attention as she explained the research methodologies used to measure the impact of her programs, the training protocols developed for other musicians interested in therapeutic work, and the advocacy efforts needed to integrate music therapy into standard healthcare practices. The most important lesson I've learned, Maya said as she concluded her presentation, is that authenticity in music isn't selfish or self-indulgent. When we create from our deepest truths, when we allow our personal experiences of joy and sorrow to inform our art, we create the possibility for profound connections with others who are walking similar paths. The music that matters most is the music that remembers what it means to be human. The standing ovation lasted several minutes, but Maya's attention was drawn to a familiar face in the third row. Judge Patricia Morrison, now retired from her position with the city's cultural arts program, was wiping tears from her eyes and applauding enthusiastically. After the formal presentation ended, she approached Maya during the reception. "I hope you know how wrong I was about you all those years ago," Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been following your work, and I can't help but think about that audition when you played Mia's Garden for us. If I had understood then what you were trying to share." Maya smiled warmly. "You weren't wrong to have standards, Patricia. You were doing your job as you understood it. But I'm grateful that rejection forced me to find my own path. I might never have discovered this work if I had gotten the permit I wanted back then. Still, I owe you more than an apology. I'd like to make a donation to your foundation if you'll accept it. Consider it my attempt to support the kind of authentic artistry I failed to recognize when it mattered most." The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Michael Chen, director of the Boston Medical Center's Integrative Medicine program. He had been trying to catch Maya's attention all evening, eager to discuss the possibility of establishing a music therapy residency program that would train physician musicians in therapeutic composition techniques. "Dr. Chen, I have to tell you how intrigued I am by your research on music's impact on neuroplasticity," Dr. Chen began. "We're seeing remarkable results with stroke patients, but we need composers who understand both musical structure and neurological healing processes. Would you consider spending a semester with us as a visiting researcher?" Maya was flattered by the invitation, but her calendar was already packed with commitments. The Children's Hospital program required constant attention, her foundation was expanding to 3 new cities, and she had promised to complete a concerto commissioned by the National Symphony Orchestra for their upcoming season focused on healing arts. More offers came throughout the evening. A documentary filmmaker wanted to follow Maya's work for a project about innovative healthcare approaches. A major recording label was interested in producing an album of her therapeutic compositions for commercial distribution. A prestigious university offered her a tenure-track position developing their new graduate program in music therapy. Each opportunity represented validation of the path Maya had chosen, recognition that her integration of artistic authenticity with community service had created something genuinely valuable. But as the evening wound down and she found herself exhausted by the attention and possibilities, Maya felt a familiar longing for the simplicity of her early community work. The next morning, Maya walked through Central Park before her flight back home, reflecting on how much her life had changed since those desperate days of street performing. Financial security was no longer a concern. Professional recognition had exceeded her wildest dreams. The impact of her work was being felt across the country, helping thousands of patients and their families find comfort and healing through music. Yet something was missing. The intimate connection she had felt during those early community performances, the direct relationship between her music and individual listeners' needs, had become diluted by the scale of her success. She was reaching more people than ever before, but often through institutional programs and recorded materials rather than face-to-face musical encounters. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Kim, emergency at the hospital. Young patient asking specifically for you. Can you come in today? Without hesitation, Maya changed her flight and took a taxi to the children's hospital. In the pediatric intensive care unit, she found 7-year-old Marcus Thompson, newly diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that would require months of treatment. He had been watching videos of Maya's performances online and had specifically requested to meet the lady who plays the sad happy song. Maya spent the afternoon at Marcus's bedside, playing gentle variations of May's Garden and teaching him simple melodies he could hum when the medical procedures became overwhelming. His parents sat nearby, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their son's anxiety visibly decrease with each note. "Will you write a song just for me?" Marcus asked as Maya prepared to leave. "Something that sounds like being brave even when you're scared." That evening, Maya sat at her home studio's piano, the same instrument that had once barely fit in her tiny apartment, and began composing a new piece. Marcus's courage emerged slowly, a melody that captured the complex emotions of childhood resilience in the face of serious illness. It would join her growing collection of individually commissioned pieces, songs written for specific patients who needed music that spoke directly to their unique circumstances. As she worked, Maya realized that her greatest satisfaction still came from these personal connections, from the moment when music created a bridge between her experience and another person's need for comfort or strength. All the professional accolades and institutional programs were meaningful, but the heart of her work remained in these individual encounters where music became medicine, art became healing, and connection transcended the boundaries of illness and fear. The success that had once seemed so elusive now felt almost overwhelming in its scope and responsibility. Maya understood that she had become more than a musician or even a music therapist. She had become a symbol of the possibility that authentic artistic expression could create positive change in the world, that personal truth could become public service, that the music closest to one's heart could also be the music that healed others' wounds. But with that recognition came the challenge of maintaining the authenticity that had made her work powerful in the first place. The temptation to become a brand, a movement, a cause greater than the individual connections that had sparked everything, was constant. Maya knew she would need to guard carefully against losing the intimate personal quality that had always defined her most meaningful musical moments. Looking ahead, Maya envisioned a future where her foundation would train hundreds of musician healers, where therapeutic composition would become a standard part of medical treatment, where every hospital and care facility would have access to the kind of musical support that had transformed so many lives. But she also envisioned maintaining space for the work that had started it all, sitting at a piano with someone who needed exactly what her music could provide, creating melodies that acknowledged pain while offering hope, building bridges of sound across the isolation that suffering could create. The journey from Heritage Square to Carnegie Hall had taught Maya that success wasn't about choosing between authenticity and impact, between personal truth and public service. The most meaningful work happened when those elements aligned, when the music that came from the deepest places in her heart also reached the deepest needs in others' lives. That alignment, she understood now, was what her grandmother had meant when she said that music lived in the soul and could never be taken away. Maya's story was far from over. Each day brought new opportunities to share her gift, new patients who needed the healing that music could provide, new possibilities for expanding the reach of therapeutic composition. But whatever came next, she would remember the lessons learned during those difficult years of struggle and rejection, that the most beautiful music often emerged from the most broken places, that authentic artistic expression was not a luxury but a necessity, and that the songs that saved others were often the same songs that had first saved ourselves. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.